Welcome to the Wednesday, September 17th board meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Ex officio, Myra De Vera. Commissioner Metcalf. Commissioner Mishoff. Alternate Sherry McCoy for Commissioner Butt. Here. Commissioner Abelson. Here. Commissioner Pierce. Here. Commissioner Arnridge.
Here.
Commissioner Taylor.
Here.
Commissioner Hudson.
Here.
Ex officio Gail Murray.
Here.
And Chair Bromwich.
Here.
Thank you.
On to item D, public comment. There's an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on issues that are not on the agenda. I don't have any speaker cards. Is there anyone out there currently who would like to address the board? If not, we'll move on to item 1.0, approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second. I have a first by Abelson, second by Pierce. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. 2.0 is a consent calendar. Is there anyone who would like to remove any items from the consent calendar? I will be removing 2A1.
Move the balance.
Second.
Mike, you had another one you wanted off? Okay. What do you think? 2B8?
2B8.
Okay, I have a motion on the remainder of the calendar. I'll go
I did.
ahead.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Whatever.
First.
Okay, yeah, right. No, I thought somebody else was talking. I had a first by Pierce, second by Arnott. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. 2A1. I had some concerns with some of the dates on it that seem to be moving a little bit in the wrong direction.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Romick. Ross Chittenden, Deputy Executive Director with the Authority. For the rest of the Commission, I believe Chair Romick is referring to some comments on page 32 related to State Route 4 corridor. So we wanted to flag for you, and I appreciate the question, that we're encountering some weather condition out there that's having a significant impact on the three remaining the highway construction contracts out there, and as a result could have an impact on BART's ability to get into the median for the eBART project. Specifically what's happening, excuse me, on many days where we're placing concrete out there, if the conditions aren't right, we can expect that the concrete will crack. We've had a lot of, I'm sure you've read in the newspaper around the state, and a couple of our projects have experienced concrete panels that have cracked during the curing process. So the specifications allow judgment to be made in the field between the contractor and the field staff as to whether the conditions are appropriate for placing the concrete. We've encountered, of the projects, the three remaining projects, we've encountered on one project about 50 days where we've made a decision not to place the concrete, and then 100 days on a couple of the other contracts. So the net results are that the final two projects, what we refer to as 3A and 3B in Antioch, are currently 4 to 6 months behind schedule. We've been saying end of 2015 consistently. We're at this point in time, we're starting to see slipping into the early parts of 2016 as a result of this. Actions that have been taken by staff. We've had a high-level partnering meeting with the contractor, the executive director, and I even met with the contractor. They've given us a plan and a commitment to recover as much of that as possible. We have that quantified on one of the projects. We need a couple of weeks to quantify that on the other project. We've been working with BART staff. BART recently awarded their final construction contract out there for the track work and the finishes on the facility. They have not yet issued an NTP, or actually have issued a notice to proceed for that contract to their contractor, but they have not yet mobilized. So the approach, and BART staff is open to this, is that they'll use the best information we can get them, and if needed, adjust some of the dates in their contract. So financially, I don't think this is going to have a big impact. It is likely to have a couple of month impact on opening the highway and a commensurate impact on the potential date for the BART revenue service. So again, we wanted to flag this for you just so you're aware of it and give you an update on the activities we're taking to try to bring as much of that back. Giving you more definitive information, we should be able to do that at the latest by the November meeting.
Questions of staff? Mike?
Yeah, if this were an APC meeting, I wouldn't have much trouble asking this question. I'd really want a good detailed answer, but I'll try to keep it really brief.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just ask it this way. The financial burden for any cost resulting from the delays will be borne by the contractor or by CCTA?
It's a weather day is not necessarily a compensable day, so it's a day that's granted without any compensation. Now, with that said, there are costs. You know, we have staff out there, so it's the main cost to the highway contracts would be continuing to pay for the inspectors and so forth that are out there because there's other work going on. On the BART side, that's to be determined if they're able to negotiate some changes in the schedule without compensation. But for the highway side, it's a non-compensable day.
Okay, well, will you be coming to ABC with a more detailed analysis of this once it becomes clear?
Yes, we can commit to do that no later than November.
I would move the item A21. 2A1, sorry, not A2.
First by Newell, second by Sherry. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. On to 2B8, update on Senate Bill 743.
Would you like to know why I pulled it?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay, this I was shocked when I read this that this was on well, one, that it was on consent, first thing, and then two, that there were no changes noted, changes from committee, none. When this came to the planning committee just a couple of weeks ago, there was a robust discussion, let's put it that way, about this whole subject of VMT replacing LOS in PDAs. How about all those acronyms? The comment that I heard from one of our esteemed colleagues on the committee who has a legal background, so don't you know who that is? It wasn't me. He said that this law is is just creating a situation that is ripe for legal challenges, and the outcomes of those are not going to be what we would like. And it was he was not very happy with it. I mean, the problem is that there's too many unanswered questions. This thing is going to be implemented very, very quickly if OPR has its way, like the beginning of next year, and there could be some real problems. And from the discussion, we got to the letter that had been proposed by staff, and it was a very polite letter, which made some good points in it, and it did so, very correctly. But it was one of those letters that was just ripe to be ignored by OPR, and so I asked that the letter be strengthened, and I didn't say let's not be rude about things, but let's at least do something akin to pounding our fist on the table to get their attention. And since that time, I've heard from a number of other people, namely our own planning staff, who's been involved with some of our planning colleagues throughout the county. And the planning staffs have no idea how they're going to handle this thing. It's a real problem, apparently, in their minds, procedurally. So I was disappointed that there was that apparently the letter that was originally drafted is what's got sent. And, it's just a very polite letter that's going to wind up in Sacramento. And I don't think it's going to do the job. And what disappoints me specifically is I specifically heard Randy say that he would get together with, I believe it was Lindsay, and they were going to confer with somebody about some alternate language that could be used. And so I was looking for some change, and apparently it hasn't happened. So I'd like to know what happened.
So, Commissioners, we had as Commissioner Metcalf said, we had a robust discussion about this issue and the implementation and how fast it was going to be. And we committed to check in with the League of Cities to find out what their position was, and also CalCog. CalCog chose not to respond because their membership is divided on how to respond. And we checked the League of Cities. Oh, Matt checked with the League of Cities, and the letter's kind of like ours. It's like, I don't know what the term is, milk and cookies, vanilla, or whatever, but it's not
Milk toast.
milk toast. Yeah, it's not too strong. But so we checked in with both agencies. One didn't respond, the other did respond. It was already signed. We couldn't be a co-signer. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, those the two letters that we got from the League of Cities were actually responding to earlier documents from OPR, and I still haven't seen anything focused on this latest preliminary draft that's out for discussion right now. So I was just down in Anaheim this weekend at the American Planning Association conference, and SB 743 was probably the most popular item down there. There were several panels devoted to this topic, and everybody down there was just as torn, not knowing. There are no real answers out there to all these questions, and people don't know how to respond. So people are, but most people have the same concerns we did. That was what I heard over and over, was the same concerns we had. So I would imagine most of the letters that are going to be out there are going to address the same issues we're addressing, but certainly if the direction we received at Planning Committee was to go with the letter as is and confer with the League and the Council of Governments. But we certainly could firm up the letter if that's the direction from the board.
Well, has it gone out?
No.
Well, I think it must have been me. I think I made the comment. I said, I wonder what the reaction of the whole board would be if they read the letter as it was drafted. And maybe that's, if there's time, maybe that's the thing to do. If you want to send the thing out the way it is, okay. But, while the vote went 4-1, I voted against it. While I went 4-1 to go ahead and send, certainly the conversation suggested there wasn't a lot of conviction in the four positives. So I would ask the chair to consider asking that letter to come back to the full board. if they think it's worth doing.
Well, you go ahead.
We do have a deadline of October 10th to submit a letter to OPR.
No.
I was just going to suggest Martin happened to be at our Tri-Valley Transportation meeting, and this same subject came up because Tri-Valley Transportation Council was going to send a letter. We also had a representative from Alameda Transportation Authority, and we had a copy of the proposed CCTA meeting letter. Our consensus was same thing here. We're not happy with this. For cities like Danville, Clayton, and places like this is the worst thing that can happen to us. This is a parting shot from a senator who's looking for a job. Basically gave a free ride that now applies to the entire state of California. It says you can build anything you want and you don't have to mitigate traffic. I mean, that's my short version of it. That's what it says. Most of us have level of service because it helps throttle development to make sure there's a clear nexus between the impacts that those development cause. This is a free ride to exempt that. Makes sense. It was originally intended for San Francisco and the major metropolitan areas that on paper can never, ever build a project unless they have these waivers. But they have other transportation systems. They are dense urban environments. They have robust systems that while it's gridlocked for vehicular traffic, it works in other ways. But the most important thing was we thought all of our letters, if one agency sends a letter, it's a raindrop in the ocean. That if we all coordinated our letters and we all had the same message of those things that we agreed on, it would maybe carry a lot more weight in trying to get them because there is interpretation from OPR. And it's not all law, it's interpretation. So can we influence that interpretation to make it a little bit more palatable and more useful to our common goal here? And I think the consensus was at TVTC today that, yeah, I think there is. So I would ask that the letter that we write to coordinate with Alameda, who's a close partner with us, our TVTC, those are our three local major transportation agencies. TVTC, for those of you who might remember, it's a Alameda Contra Costa agency at the southern end of Contra Costa. And our two, if we coordinated our letters and hammered in the same points, which I felt we had that consensus, I think we would have a stronger chance of having it being heard. Otherwise, our letter is nothing. So my ask would be, I wasn't in the discussion with Mike, is that's what our goal ought to be. I think that there's a shared view. If we need to tweak the letter a little bit, I would give staff that opportunity, but I would ask them to coordinate with Alameda County, TVTC, and make sure our letters all have that same strength and send the letter in as soon as possible.
Well, I was first going to ask, but the question was already answered in regards to the timeline and what the issue that we have in regards to that. So it's already been stated. But did somebody want to make a motion on the floor in regards to this, and then we could discuss that item? Okay.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that if the deadline for comments is October 10th, our planning committee meets again on October 1st, I believe. I'd be more than happy to refer this back to the committee and ask that we do exactly what Newell outlined and maybe collaborate a little with some of our neighbors and our colleagues to make sure we're sending the same message if at all possible, and strengthen the letter accordingly. It probably does make sense for some areas. It probably doesn't for others. We did some version of this years and years ago here in our own county where we sort of exempted transit-oriented development areas from having to meet the same levels of delay standards as we imposed on everyone else, because areas around BART stations that are more congested and denser development are going to induce delay. And that's intentional because it's near a transit station. So this is sort of a grand expansion of that, but it's somewhat the same concept. So I think we need to think about that and allow the planning committee to have a little more discussion. Then I would authorize them to go ahead and send a letter. That's a motion.
Second by Mike. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. On to item 3.0, major discussion items. There are none. 4.0, regular agenda items. 4A, Administration and Projects Committee. As the APC did not meet in September, the following items are being referred to the authority. But anyway, 4A116, legislative update. Ms. Willis.
Good evening, Commissioners. As your packet states, APC did not meet earlier this month, so typically during those meetings, Mark Watts, our legislative analyst, comes and provides an update, so we thought it would be beneficial for him to give that update to the full board this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm pleased to be here. As you know, there's a week and a half left for the governor to dispense with legislation that was passed this summer, and he's making some progress. I thought I'd give you a report on probably a half dozen bills of interest, and I'll make it quick depending upon how I see your reaction. The first category would be bills you took positions on that are still pending on the governor's desk. And the first of those is Assembly Bill 1147, which is really catching a lot of support, and that measure would authorize explicitly traffic signal synchronization projects to be eligible for cap and trade funding. It's a logical bill, and it developed a lot of legislative support, and it's generating op-ed support across the state. Another measure by Senator DeSaulnier, SB 1077, deals with a road user charge demonstration program, and you may have started to read or see opposition op-eds and several points of opposition developing. I'll say this about the measure. The measure is in line with something I'll talk about toward the end, which is the California Transportation Infrastructure Priorities Task Force that Secretary Kelly, the Transportation Secretary, is implementing and moving through the process. And it's striking how similar some of the recommendations coming out of that CTIP work group with respect to a road user charge demonstration program align themselves with the legislation. I think the senator's staff worked very closely with the Transportation Agency. It's right now, I think the betting in Sacramento is it's an even bet whether the governor signs it, and I think that's more of a political issue because I think signing it kind of puts him on the front burner on a road user charge, even though it's just simply a demonstration program. Not signing it just says that he's got the authority and he's going to let his administrator at the Transportation Agency undertake the demonstration program. Nevertheless, there's a mounting amount of support to offset the opposition. Just one passing note, we had this on tracking, but we didn't take a position, but I just thought I'd mention that Mr. Frazier scored a nice double today with AB 1857. It's a measure. Just got word that it was signed as I was leaving the office to drive down here, and so his office is very happy. And it's a bill I worked with him on. It allows Caltrans to use best value in heavy-duty vehicle procurements, trying to save some money for the rehabilitation program by doing such. Anyway, so that's kudos to Mr. Frazier for that. Several other bills I want to highlight. Commissioner Pierce was right again, and I spent the whole summer watching to see if her prognostication was going to come true. And yes, on the last day of session, SB 792 was gutted and amended, and the regional governance language that had been in there before, the coordination between regional entities, was deleted and was replaced with a completely different topic. So Senator DeSaulnier did meet up with you, although I was having palpitations as the end of session was getting closer and closer, and I was talking more and more to his office. Probably the biggest disappointment, or, well, I shouldn't make judgment, but a very disappointing turn of events occurred with SB 983. This is a measure that just at the last APC meeting that I was at had kind of broken into the open, and that was an LA senator had amended a measure to establish or reestablish and extend the authority for hot lane development in the state. And at one point, it looked like that bill was going to have a fair chance to get through to the governor. And ironically, it too looks a lot like some of the recommendations I'll be discussing later from the Secretary's work group. Essentially, it would have authorized Caltrans and then separately authorized regional entities to undertake hot lane projects after having secured approval by the State Transportation Commission. There were several other provisions in the measure, but the measure eventually failed, mainly because the bill was in appropriations in the Assembly, and the chairman of that committee had had a difficult time a year ago with Caltrans and the administration over some hot lane or HOV lane issues and hot lane issues in LA County. And so he felt like he didn't want to move the bill this year, and he retained it on the suspense file. So I think we'll be returning to this measure in the coming session in one form or another. Senator Sonnier has two other measures I thought I'd just mention. One takes the current peer review process that was authorized for state agencies and extends it to regional or local entities for major projects, kind of in a nod towards a little bit of a realism. He boosted the minimum threshold to $2.5 billion for under which that peer review process would be applicable. So unless you have a project of that magnitude, you would not be subject to this peer review process. We did speak at the last APC meeting briefly about Senator's SB 1183, $5 bike tax authorized for cities, counties, and regional park districts, and I heard loud and clear some of the issues, but we ultimately didn't take a position. Nevertheless, it's pending on the governor's desk, and I'm not sure where that's going to go at this point in time. And a final measure that broke out, and I'm sure you're familiar with this from your responsibilities to your municipalities, it's the enhanced IFD measure, SB 683 by Senator Bell. And that had been an IFD bill, but then a major California Forward California Reform Group sponsored the changes that resulted in the enhanced IFD measure, and it passed pretty readily, and it's sitting on the governor's desk. It does align with some of the more recent thinking out of the Department of Finance in advising the governor on how an IFD program could be a somewhat modest replacement for redevelopment. So I think unless there's some issues deep down inside the measure for the administration, I think the governor is going to be inclined to approve that measure. So that would be it for briefing on legislation that's pending or that was dispensed toward the end of the legislative year. Briefly, I want to update you. I think about a year ago I talked about the California Transportation Infrastructure Priority Work Group. The secretary was asked by the governor in the 2013 budget cycle early in the year to deal with transportation and the looming transportation revenue problem that the state is experiencing, tapering off revenues for the state highway account from gas tax sales down, purchase price of gas tax diminishing over time, resulting in less resources to apply to much needed maintenance and repair projects in the state. And the secretary took that responsibility on, formed this CTIP work group. I'm a member of that. And in 2013, the focus was on just trying to get a handle on what the priorities the state should be looking at. The report that came out, which was called an interim report back in February, basically called on the administration or requested the administration or suggested that they move forward with this is back in early February, to come out with funding under cap and trade for transportation to some optimal extent. And I think if you look at the long-term cap and trade program with more than 40%, close to 60%, I think it is, going to transit, rail, sustainable communities, and high-speed rail, I think to a degree that they match that challenge by the CTIP work group. In addition, more specific concrete recommendations that came out of our group was early advancing the repayment of outstanding loans that had been made from transportation to the general fund, and that amounted to about almost $350 million. That was put into the budget by the governor, and it stayed in the budget and was sustained, and those funds are being applied to state and local roadway maintenance, as well as an early return of some additional local roadway money. So that was, the year was spent well. And finally, recognizing that Proposition 1B had a large amount of unappropriated transit funding and a few other pots that had not been fully appropriated, that work group in early 2014 recommended let's get that all fully appropriated, and so more than $1 million when you combine what had not been appropriated plus savings was put into the budget and out the door. So I think the Transportation Infrastructure Priorities Work Group has had some measure of success early on. So in 2014, they've continued to work. Basically, they had 3 specific targeted work groups, one to work on a road user charge. Just take a look at that and examine it, come back with a recommendation. The other was to take a look at the STIP, is the State Transportation Improvement Program, either on the state side or on the regional side, doing what policymakers in Sacramento expected to do. And finally, they wanted to, they formed a work group to address and look at the issue of pricing on state roadways, pricing, meaning managed lanes, tolling, hot lanes, and the like. And yesterday, the first draft reports were considered by the entire work group. So each of those 3 separate individual work groups were rolled up into one massive potential consensus work group and took a look at those. There had been a lot of controversy over the STIP work, and I won't go into any detail right now, but I think the RTPAs, the MPOs, and so forth pulled together and beat back efforts to diminish or redirect where the STIP funds could be spent. There had been a very strong push by some organizations, stakeholder organizations in the state, to further supplement active transportation and other kinds of programs that the STIP has traditionally not been aligned with. And I think the MPOs and RTPAs work real well together within the context of that work group to reshape that. As a consequence, when that item came up yesterday, the recommendations to pretty much continue as is, but be open to voluntarily expanding where those STIP funds could be spent. It was a 22-14 vote, and it shows how the one side that had been pushing to send the money to active transportation didn't like the outcome. Nevertheless, the Secretary is going to wrap up the reports. The road user charge recommends a 6,000-person paper demonstration program. In other words, they will ask for 6,000 volunteers of a whole range of stakeholders and interest groups to go through an exercise where they will have I think probably some sort of script form exchange that shows when they pay at the pump, that if they had paid with a road user charge, here's what the difference and here's how it would have worked. So it's going to be a very protracted process to get to that, but that's the recommendation that was voted on and approved. So a 6,000-person demonstration program probably take about 1.5 to 2 years before you even see this come out. There's going to be a lot of technical advisory committees looking at privacy issues, equity issues, and geographic balance issues, and a whole host of 13 key principles. And finally, the pricing report that was approved yesterday. basically holds to and looks like a lot of what was in SB 9083, which I described earlier, which essentially says Caltrans would have the authority, regional entities would have the authority to implement hot lanes consistent with receiving approval by the State Transportation Commission before they commence with it, and then it compels interagency agreements between the state and regional entities for regional side projects on the state highway system. So that, to be implemented, would require legislation. So that's why I said I think we'll see a revisiting of a bill that looks similar to SB 983. And finally, I think the next focus for the Secretary with the CTIP work group is to look at long-term issues affecting transportation finance in the state and try to get their arms around that and come back with some sort of solution in 2015 to put on the table. So I think really if I were to make a suggestion to a board like yourselves, I would say, you know, you don't want this to just come in out of the blue, out of the CTIP process, and here's some sort of proposal to do X, Y, Z tax. But start thinking about yourselves as an organization, what would be, in terms of supplemental new state revenues, what are the kinds of things that would be endorsable or supportable as an entity? And there may or may not be any, but I think it's time to be anticipating what may be coming down your pike, and I'll be working with your staff as we go through that the next year on that process. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair Romick. I have a question for Mark. Since we were talking about Senate Bill 743, and you know the relationship between Governor Brown and Mr. Alex, I mean, that's a pretty close relationship, right? They worked together at the Attorney General's office for a long time. So based on that relationship, what do you see? I mean, this bill is going to get signed by the governor. Would that be a fair statement? SB 743, the one we're talking about.
The guidelines.
Yeah, the guidelines.
The guidelines would be approved by OPR if nobody intervenes. I think that's a true statement.
Yeah. Okay.
But I also, if I could just make a quick observation, I think the strategy your board just adopted to do a coordinated letter makes a lot of sense, because in the guideline process, they need to consider it. It's not much different than an administrative law process. They've got to take into account what organizations and stakeholders are telling them is good, bad, or indifferent about a measure. So I think if you've got a preponderance of individuals or organizations weighing in with the same points, that gives some heft to the argument. So I think you're right on the right track there.
Thanks.
On to item 4A11, Interstate 680 southbound HOV completion project, Interstate 680 North Express Lanes project.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'll be covering both of these items tonight, and I have some good news for you. I'm very pleased to announce the completion of a milestone for the I-680 southbound HOV gap completion project. The final environmental document has been signed by Caltrans and is in the process of going through the state clearinghouse, so that's really a great step forward. The authority, as a responsible agency in terms of contributing to the project's completion, must also consider the effects of the project and determine whether there are any feasible alternatives or mitigation measures under the authority's powers that would lessen or avoid the impacts of the project. As such, you have Resolution 1446-P attached, and this does three things. The first, it certifies Caltrans environmental documentation. They have been the lead agency for both CEQA and NEPA.
It also concludes that no feasible alternatives or mitigation measures under the authority's powers are needed. And it directs the executive director to file a notice of determination with the county clerk. So we'll actually go down and file our own notice of determination. So staff recommends adoption of Resolution 14-46P, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have on that.
Move approval.
Who's the second? Have a motion, first by Pierce, second by Hudson. Discussions? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, great. So now that we've completed the environmental phase for the I-680 southbound HOV gap completion project, it's going to be combined at the design stage with the I-680 North Express Lane project, which converts the southbound carpool lane from just south of Marina Vista Avenue in Martinez to Rugger Road in Walnut Creek into an express lane. So for the conversion project, I've got some more good news, and I'm happy to announce the completion of the project study report. So this is the first step in the project approval process with Caltrans, and it has just recently been signed by Caltrans. So that's a great, another hurdle crossed, that you might say. So in order to proceed to the next step, which is environmental clearance and project approval for the conversion project, the authority must enter into a cooperative agreement with Caltrans to reimburse Caltrans for preparation of the required safety analysis for a managed lane project and for their oversight of the environmental document development process. So Mark Watts just spoke of this particular group that has been formed, the CTIP work group, and he mentioned they were looking at different items in regards to managed lanes. So the policy discussions that are coming out at that level actually do support for projects funded with toll funds or managed lanes projects that Caltrans would be reimbursed for their oversight. This is not typical, say, for a project funded with our Measure J funds. So staff has been working with Caltrans staff to establish a budget. And we have had a lot of discussions, and we wanted to keep the project moving forward by entering into this cooperative agreement. So we have determined if final policies would eliminate this or change this particular requirement, then we would come back and amend the co-op agreement to reflect any refunds that would be due. So the action we're requesting tonight is to authorize the chair to execute the cooperative agreement 90.11.22 with Caltrans in an amount not to exceed $515,000 for reimbursed services during project approval environmental document, and allow the executive director to make any non-substantive changes to the particular language. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'll move staff recommendation to execute the cooperative agreement 90.11.22.
Okay, I have a first by Hudson, second by Pierce. Any discussions?
No discussion other than I'd like to note that I am an aye vote for the item previously to that.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstained, motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Get her done.
On to item 4B7, approval of a recommended PDA planning grant program.
Good evening, Chair and members. MDC gave the authority $2.745 million for PDA planning grants in Contra Costa. The purpose of the grants is to support planning for PDAs in areas such as providing housing, jobs, intensified land use, promoting alternative modes of travel to the single occupant vehicle, and parking management. To carry out this process, the authority previously approved a two-step process. First, we were to identify a list of consultant teams that would carry out the work for the project sponsors, and then we would select the projects to be funded. In March, we released an RFQ for consultant teams. We received 14 applications. We had a review committee of local planning staff familiar with PDA and infill planning, who reviewed all the applications. Out of the 14, we interviewed 6 teams, and the committee recommended 5. Arup, Opticus Design, Perkins and Will, Ramey and Associates, and Wallace, Roberts, and Todd, or WRT, as the teams that would do the work. Each of the teams is made up of a number of sub-consultants who could do transportation planning, facility, infrastructure, financing, market studies, community outreach, and other necessary planning skills for those planning grants. In June, we released a call for projects for the planning grants themselves. We received 10 applications. We had $2.745 million. We received applications that requested $2.72. So we're left with about $29,000 less than what we have available, which is a good thing. The review committee, also made up of local staff, looked at the applications, said they were all basically good. There's some question about one aspect of one of the projects, but the committee recommended that all be funded. So what we're asking tonight is that you approve both the list of consultants and the 10 planning grants that we hope to fund through this process. And the next steps would be that we would arrange marriages between the consultant teams and the sponsors, come up with scopes and budgets for the projects. We imagine there'll be some adjustments that need to be made once we make those marriages. And then come back to you with the contracts with the consultants and the scopes of work for the planning grants themselves. And we tried to do that probably in December. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I was just going to move the item, but it looks like Mr. Arnovich has a question.
Yeah, I actually have some concerns just in the process, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So we have the grants that are available. We all competed to get those. This is 3 actions. 1, to approve that, basically. It's already sort of been approved. Hire a consultant for $220,000 to manage that, and then tell all the cities who put the applications in, you're going to have to use one of these consultants, and our third party is going to manage that for them. For example, City of Walnut Creek has a specific plan on there. I'm looking at those consultants and not know that those would be one of the ones I would hire to do my North End specific plan. So is that what we're doing? That we are basically putting this agency in charge of doing those studies? That was the intention? I didn't think that's what we were doing. We made the grants. I thought each city had the right to then use those funds towards that on their own decisions. So did I miss that discussion, or did that go to PC? And that's what we as a board are intending? And are the cities happy that we, this agency, are telling them who they're going to use and we're going to manage their study for their city?
It's not quite the way it's going to work.
That's what it looks like.
It is basically what the authority approved earlier. We intended to do this process to make it easier for the locals to do these. We would take on the administrative burden of managing the federal money. Managing federal money is always a headache. So we thought we would simplify that process by us holding the contracts with the consultants, but the project sponsors would have this marriage, and they would be the ones on their knees. That's maybe not the right way to put it, but proposing to particular consultants to do their work. They would be the managers of the actual work. Our contract managers would manage the contracts, the invoicing, and making sure that the process goes along and trying to help if there are any problems between the sponsors.
So Moraga has to hire somebody on this list. That's the decision we're making, whether or not they want them or not. We don't give them an option. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that's what we're doing. It's in my community. I don't know if I'd want to do it that way. I see us administering it because the bookkeeping, only the bookkeeping, is very complex for a federal project. I get that. But that's the $220,000. But now we're also saying, not related to that, you got to hire one of these consultants that we, the authority, decided versus letting the cities make that
To
decision.
use the money, we had to go through the federal process. And that's the step that we took on, of doing the request for qualifications and hiring these consultants through the federal process, rather than having each jurisdiction go through that process.
But I
that
thought
federal
they
process.
could go through we would hire our administrator who would do the compliance. The city would say, gee, I'd like to consider these people. That administrator would go out and do that process. But the cities would get to choose that. So it would still end up the same way. We just sort of have jumped ahead before cities have weighed in.
Well, there had to be federally procured consultants to choose from.
Right, but you didn't have to do that procurement before the cities. I mean, it's like we put the cart before the egg. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, Mike, are you happy with this is it? This is who's going to do it, whether or not you think that they're appropriate for...
For some reason, we lost all the speakers.
There you are. My understanding, because I had a lot of the same concerns you did, Bill. The question I asked Brad was, well, wait a minute. You've got these 5 teams, and some of them are really strong on this kind of work, and some are really strong on other kinds of work, and so forth. And they're really, no one team could do the work of any of the 10 awardees. That was acknowledged. So the way it was explained to me was, well, what we've really done is it's like a pre-qualification of consultants. And here's the stable of consultants. Now we've got the projects that have been approved, and we're going to match up elements of the consultant. In one team, a team wouldn't necessarily stay together. The elements of the teams would be matched with the work, and that would be done in consultation with the cities. Now, the extent to which that will work out depends on whether or not CCTA gets involved in a way that is counter to the city's wishes. In other words, if they force a marriage. And I didn't get the impression that that was what you really had in mind. And I certainly hope that's the case, because, when I was talking about this with our planning staff, they had identically the same concern that you did. Well, what do we do here? I mean, I said it's going to be a mix and match, and it's going to be, you really can't predetermine who's going to get what, but it's going to be quite a discussion with CCTA and each of the cities to figure out who's going to be, which of the elements of which consulting teams are going to be on which projects. Now, the other thing that Brad pointed out, and that certainly our staff appreciated, was the administrative hassles of dealing with the feds is going to be taken on by CCTA contracting, which is a great relief to us, at least. But the actual administration of the work, the direction of the work, is not going to be done by CCTA. It'll be done by the cities. Now, if that works out, it'll be okay. And we're just going on the bet that it's going to work out, because Randy said it would.
Martin, you had something to add, Martin?
Just Commissioner Arnrich, this has been before the board 3 times. It also went to the planning directors twice. And what we've heard in the past and what we've experienced in the past has been, if you have a little project, a $100,000 project, and a city has to go out and get the federal approval for that, get an E76, and then procure the consultant and follow all the federal guidelines, it is a huge headache. So we got agreement from all the cities that we could eliminate that headache by saying, here's $2.7 million. We will get 1 federal grant approval for that. And also, we'll select a pool of consultants and the cities can choose. And the issue that has come up in the past is the City A loves consultant call them consultant X, okay? City A loves consultant X. And so we say, here's $100,000 in federal money. They say, great, I'm choosing consultant X. They're my favorite one. They just did my general plan with local money, and we're going to procure consultant X. And we tell them, no, you actually, if you do that, you're going to be ineligible for the federal funds because you can't sole source a federal project. You have to go through this procurement process.
So I'm okay with that.
So we did all that, and then I think we have enough variety there that I don't think any of the cities are going to say none of these guys are okay. They'll like one of them, and maybe they're sub-consultants
Here's
too.
the bottom line. I don't agree with the process because I think all we had to do is, did the cities agree to that list that was there? Did we ask every city and say, here's people, are there people here that you know you want to work with? And are they on this approved list? Because if we didn't, then that's my point. We should have hired our consultant, then went out and did this process, because that's the person who said it was going to administer that. We'd still end up in the same place, but we would end up with a list of people that are guaranteed, because there are consultants on there that their minimum fee is greater than what he's getting. But $150,000, they won't take the job for $150,000. So did the cities of those that are on the list, did they approve this list before we went out to bid?
It's been a parallel process. So
It's either yes or no.
It's a no.
Okay. So that's my entire issue right there. Thank you.
I have a speaker card, Don Tatson.
Yeah, I had mine on
Okay. I will get to you.
Hi, Don Tatson from the City of Lafayette, hopefully as a grant recipient this evening. I've read the staff report. I think it's great that the authority is taking on the federal contracting role. Happy to see that. Our council had not heard of the list of consultants. It may well be that staff did. It just didn't bubble up to us. As I look at this, I would be happy as one city, if we get funded, to try hard to see if there's a match among the list, and would ask the authority to understand that if we find that none of them meets our needs for whatever reason, they don't want to work with us or that we don't think they have the skills, that we have the ability in what you approve to come back and explain why, and at that point to consider an alternative. I understand the desire on the authority's part to have a limited number of contractors to work with because of all the work required with federal processing. And so I'd like to try and make that work. We would just ask for an out in case if it doesn't.
Thank you. Janet.
Yes, I remember this coming before this group and also the planning committee numerous times. So it seems like this is kind of after the fact. But what? Well, the whole issue came that way, and so there were opportunities to bring this up. It's if one thought that was an issue, one could have brought it up before. But the main thing I remember about this as being the sort of reason to do this versus some other process is the small value of some of the contracts. And if you look at, and that was, I think, before we knew how much each of the applicants was going to apply for. So if you look, say, Oakley, for example, has a $100,000 request, and to administer a federal contract for a $100,000 request is beneath the threshold of what I think we've done in other processes. Am I right, staff? Yeah. Yeah. So that actually was a lot of what was, I think, driving this, as I remember having been there, talking about it. It was the very small size of these planning grants. These are planning grants, right? Yeah. So this is not a grant to, design and build a project. This is a planning grant. It's a very small grant. You can look at these. The largest one here, I think, is $450,000, followed by, there's a $317 and a $300, and then it keeps going down. So they're really small contracts. And I think that was a lot of why we were doing it this way, to try to make it possible to use the money here to actually do the work of the project of the planning grant. So that's what I remember. That's all I wanted to say.
I would just add that I agree with all that. We've had that conversation. It got down to the question I asked Martin. We did not, and there's no excuse for this, we should have asked the cities to submit names for them to put on the list to see if they would qualify, and we didn't do that. And that's confirmed by Don Tatson, who stood up. So if we're going to go ahead with this, we need to be able to have some accommodation for these people, because after all, this is for the cities. They made the application, but we skipped the process of asking them on the consultant list. Not that we all agreed that we were going to manage it, and that's a really great value, no question. We just missed an important aspect. This is not the first time. We had this on another project. We had this when we were looking at safe routes to school. Same exact problem.
Ron?
I was just wondering, is it possible to tweak this so that, well, tell me the downside. If you have a suggested list as opposed to the only list, and then allow for cities, if they don't choose to have one of these people, that still fits the criteria that was established and fit into that. I mean, is that something that could be done?
Certainly, there are many ways to fix this. If you want to fix it, if you think it's broken, we received proposals from 14 teams, and we selected the selection committee through the federal process selected 5 consultants. We interviewed 6. We selected 5 teams, and they're very big teams. If a city were, and when we sent the notifications to the consultants, what we always say is, should our negotiations be unsuccessful, when we tell a consultant that they weren't selected, we always tell them, should our negotiation with the selected firm or firms be unsuccessful, we will contact you. So I don't think there's anything preventing us from going further down that list from 5 to 6 to 7 to 14 to provide a larger palette of available consultants. So that's one approach. But I also think that we will start with the 5 teams that won on qualifications, and then take it from there.
And we can do that without amending anything tonight?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Okay, Martin, you just said something that wants me to get a confirmation of what I thought I heard at the planning committee meeting, that some of these teams have got a number of sub-consultants, right? So if you took a look at, if you did a rack up of not just the primes, but all their subs as well, you end up with a list that's just, I don't know how long it is, but it's a lot more than 5. Now, if you took that list of all those consultants, and then you went across with all the projects, and you put that out to all the cities, the 10 cities, you came back and they said they nominated who they wanted to use from the list of available consultants. You put them all together, you're going to come up with a picture of who's going to get what, right? Is that the approach you're looking at?
That's exactly.
That's what I thought.
That's exactly the approach, and we can
exactly
they can pick and choose from the teams as well, because there's expertise among the teams, and a particular city may just want to use a sub to a prime who has expertise, and that's how we would do it. The subs are available to provide these services.
Okay,
through
on
the prime.
reflection of what I heard the other at the planning committee, I said, well, what happens if it turns out that, you know, in the extreme, almost unimaginable case where everybody wanted 1, and the other side of it is that nobody wanted some other 1 or 2. What do you do then? Now we're talking about the expanded list of the primes and all their subs. What do you do then?
I think if that happens, we can actually assign more work to one consultant than to the other. We're not obligated to assign work to any one or all 5 consultants. If they have the capacity and everybody wants that particular consultant, and they say to us that they can do it, I don't think we're obligated to spread it around by any formula to the 5 chosen ones.
What bothers me, you say you don't think you're obligated. That means you're not sure.
Commissioners, the process was set up, and we use not every city staff to help with the selection process, but what they did is they developed an RFP that they thought was all-encompassing to do the work that was envisioned for this $2.745 million. And so there were city staff on it to help select and rank the consulting teams. They cut the line off, put together an array of vendors to do what they thought was going to be the kind of the scope of the various projects that were going to occur. And it was done to save a lot of resources, because otherwise you have 10 cities advertising 10 federal contracts for $100,000, which you're not going to do. In normal circumstances, if we gave a city $100,000 of federal money, they'd say, take it back, we don't want it. Just give us half the measure money. So we try to cut all that out, and this is, I think, the first time we've done this kind of potpourri of consulting so you can select. And I think that anytime vendors get like you bid work and you're the top vendor and you don't get selected, there's an expectation that you probably thought you were going to get some work. So I think that's what Martin is trying to say, which I'll say is that, if you're in a top-ranked vendor, I think the expectation is that you're going to get some of that work. And this process was done competitively. I like Martin's idea that if you don't see the expertise within the top 5 firms, then drop down a bit and make sure that it's still federally eligible, is competitively bid, and then we'll be okay until you find that expertise that you think, or that the city staff thinks that they need to make that project a whole. I think ultimately we're going to, on this process, if it doesn't work well this time, we won't use it again, and we'll just bid out 10 separate federalized contracts. But I doubt if you're going to accept that, because it's going to be a lot of work. I think this process allows you some flexibility. I like the flavor of it, because it gives the cities options to pick this expertise and then this expertise and this expertise. But I think the way to answer your question, Commissioner Metcalf, is it's hard if you're the top bidder, the top team, and you don't get a bit of that work. What are the expectations? That's a hard question to answer.
Would council like to opine on what he's hearing vis-a-vis the contracting laws?
I mean, generally, it will depend on what's in the RFQ and how we identified kind of what we were looking for in specifications. So to the extent, yes, competitive bidding laws control, but at the same time, if we detail that we want certain specifications from the consultants, and these consultants are not offering that, then yeah.
Substitute.
Exactly.
So you're really going for a substitute project.
Mr. Taylor.
Crazy question, Martin. So we do the teams. Who decides who gets the most bucks? How do the consulting fees, how does that do? Does CCTA determine that, or do the cities, or?
Well, Commissioner Taylor, the process was competitively bid based upon purely on qualifications, not on fees. And so in the federal process, we're not allowed to ask for bids. We can only ask for qualifications. So we have 5 qualified.
But they're still got to be paid, right?
We have 5 qualified consultants. And when they came to the interview, they gave us their financial information regarding their hourly rates and their multiplier. And we require by policy that their multiplier not be greater than 3.0. So if they pay somebody $1 an hour, they can't charge more than $3 an hour for that person. And the rates, I think, are fairly stable throughout the industry. There's, their hourly rates and annual salaries that are fairly consistent. And so it'll essentially be the number of hours that they put in to do a $100,000 or $150,000 project. They'll tell us how many hours are involved, and then they'll bill us for those hours on a time and material basis, not to exceed the contract amount. So the money hasn't been talked about yet in a serious way, and that comes with contract negotiations.
I'm aware of that, but I guess what really got me a little confused, if 4 of the cities like the same people, so can they gobble up pretty much the same people? Does that make sense to you? Never mind. I don't, it's fine. I'm not a contract man, so.
Contrary.
It's done.
I think the question that Bob's trying to ask is what happens if you get 3 cities that say we want that guy, and all of a sudden that guy is torn, then his management's going to say, we'll put him on halftime on this one and halftime on that one, and the third one is out of luck, or something like that. You can end up with a resource constraining thing. Personally, we looked at this approach over in Moraga, and we said, this is a whole lot better than not getting anything. Let's see if we can make it work. And we're placing our faith that you guys are going to be reasonable and not interfere. If we say that, no, we don't want that particular guy, this is the ones we want, you're going to do everything you can to make that happen. You're not going to get in the way of us being satisfied customers. At the end of the day, if we can't get the work done with your contractor, we'll just probably tell them to go away. I guess, because, you got to do it right. What we're doing is the kind of stuff we want to do. You've got to have the right individual or individuals on it. So we're just having we're just having faith that it's going to work out. And if it doesn't, well, we'll just have to, meet that one when we get to it. So I intend to vote for this thing.
Motion to approve. All right, I have a motion out there already.
Yeah, I'm fine with staff recommendation. I'm going to vote on it. I think we're missing part of the issue that has been brought up, and that is where the process that was done, and maybe we need to take another look at it. Doing things after the fact is never my favorite, but maybe we need to send out who the 5 teams are, what the 14 teams were, and a little bit of what we did to all the cities. This is what we did. This is what you have available. We've got 10 that hopefully we're approving tonight, and I assume there's going to be more down the road. These better not be the only PDA grants that we're doing, or we've wasted an awful lot of time. But there was a concerted effort to tell you that disclosure and buy-in from the cities, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth on this one, was not done to the optimum. And so maybe I keep saying maybe after this meeting, I think we should probably do a follow-up letter, let the cities know what we did tonight.
I have a motion, and I have a first by Mitchoff, a second by Taylor. Any other discussions?
I just want to, first of all, note that I like the process. I like what we're doing. It's just that we missed an important crucial step, and I hope we do not do this again, is that when we are doing something on behalf of all of us and our agencies, that in fact our agencies, there are 3 of the agencies that sat on there, they must be happy with the consultant list. But it was an easy, simple thing to ask the cities, by the way, we're going out to bid on this. Do you have a consultant that you'd like to make sure is included on that list? That's the only criticism I have, and I think that's an easy fix in the future. I'm going to abstain on this issue.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
1 abstention.
1 abstention. So I have a 11-1 vote with 1 abstention. Arner? 9, can't be 9-1. I counted, made my counting 0-1. 901. Okay, 901. I don't know where I came with 12. 901. All right, on to correspondence and communications. Is there any comments or questions regarding the correspondence and communications? On to 6.0 Associated Committee Reports. Any comments? On to 7.0 Commissioner and Staff Comments. I don't have any at this time. Are there any Commissioner comments?
Yeah. I think Don Katzen did a great job at our outreach, and he should do all the outreach.
Okay, anybody else? On to our executive staff comments.
Commissioners, I have just a couple of comments. One, as we build eBART, one of the projects, it's the second one on the first page, it's called Transit Connect Project. It's a partnership between Tri-Delta Transit, Caltrans, and the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And the idea is to look at 3 different areas as they do a planning study for their routes. As the transit facility is extended into Antioch, they may not need some of the existing bus routes. So they're doing an analysis of that. So in coordination with that, we've talked about doing a connection protection, which means when somebody drops off BART or drops off a bus, there's somebody there, something there to pick them up to complete that trip. Dynamic routing, so if you don't have to keep the same route, you can modify that route based on usage and need. And the other thing is real-time ride sharing, in this case using taxis. And so we like this idea. Caltrans, they're close to funding this project, hopefully. I think it's about $500,000. We'll keep you informed on that as well. On the second page, one of the things that we've done all over the place and sprinkled throughout this is the outreach for the comprehensive countywide transportation planning process. So I wanted to thank Martin and Lindsay and the team for getting out and doing it differently. We've gone out, and I opened a Twitter account, much to the horror of Lindsay, because I don't know how to use it, and so she's worried about what I'm going to tweet next. So she's actually my tweeting guru, and so I make sure that we check in and we get the tweet correct with the right hashtags and those kinds of things, and it goes to the right location with the right information, not the wrong information. But the results so far are pretty tremendous on the way we're going out. We're getting great attendance at the outreaches, better than anticipated. And we've got almost 3,000 people have visited the website. Of that, once you have to sign in and identify yourself, 308 people have created an account, 231 submitted ideas. Buses, BARTs, bicycle, pedestrians are trending as the top priorities. There have been 83 paper surveys returned and 43 comments submitted via email. So one thing is happening is we're getting inundated with requests for changes, for additions in our CTP, and so I think Martin, in order to do it right, we're going to need a little more time on the environmental dock and a little more time in closing out the comments. But as we mentioned before, the comprehensive transportation plan is a living document. So if you or your friends have ideas, put them in there, and we'll try to make sure that they're incorporated. Because what we want to do is make sure that the citizens and the people that took the time to submit comments we're going to be able to say, we heard you, here it is in the transportation plan, here's where it resides, and then here's how we're going to tell our story when the media calls and asks. As far as the northbound HOV lane, I went to a meeting one-on-one in MTC, and we came away with $10 million through the environmental and design work where we didn't have the dollars before. So that's why it's important that the PA&ED is signed. So now we've got the dollars. We actually only needed $8.17 million, but we got 10. So it's better to ask for more and give some money back than it is to ask for less and have to ask for more money later. And I think that's, unless there's any questions on my report, that's really, it's mostly the comprehensive countywide transportation plan.
Questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On to the calendar. Any questions, comments, suggestions on the calendar?
8.3, what are you looking for? You want to go to Santa Clara? What did you talk to? Is there a recommendation or 8.3 is focus on the future or something like that? Is there anybody going to that or talk to Randy? Okay.
Yep. If you want to go to the Focus on the Future, it's held this year at the Hyatt in November in Santa Clara. It's easy access. I think if there's a lot of topics that you'd be interested in, so if you want to go, let Denise know, and we'll get you signed up as soon as possible.
Go to the Focus on the Future website. The entire agenda is there with what a lot of the panels are and the activities. Yeah, I'm going. I don't know. Yeah. Janet usually goes. Amy's going.
Okay.
It's local, so.
Okay. We're done. Adjourned.